In the 1990s, General Motors put Andon cords into its factories, a rope over the assembly line. Pull it, and you signal a problem. Toyota had proven it worked, so GM copied it. In some of those plants, workers who pulled the cord got yelled at. In a few plants, the cords were cut down. The rope went up. The answer never came. So the rope came down. Now, hold on to that image because it's the whole story of this episode. There's a word on a wall, probably somewhere near you, on a poster in a hallway, or on a slide in a deck, or on a mug in some corporate break room. The word is Kaizen, and underneath it, in a lighter font, there's probably a translation which says continuous improvement. Maybe there's a mountain or a stack of small stones. The word describes something real, something that happens on a specific factory floor. It's not a mood and it's not an attitude. It's really a piece of machinery, and most of the machinery didn't make it across the ocean. What Kaizen names inside Toyota and what Kaizen names in a Western office aren't the same thing. One is a practice with authority attached to the floor, and the other is just a poster, a workshop, and a quarterly meeting. By the end of this, I want to show you the exact hinge, because Kaizen isn't a mindset. Kaizen is a bargain. It has a price, and somebody paid it on a particular day, in a particular year, and I could tell you his name. Now, this is an episode about borrowed. In this series, I follow words across borders and watch what happens to them in transit. Some things survive the crossing, some things don't. This is the hardest one I've looked at because what got left behind wasn't a nuance. It was the mechanism. So start with the word, because the word is smaller than you think. Kaizen is written with two characters, Kai, which means change, and Zen, which means here, good. Change for the better, improvement. In Japanese, that's all it means. It's an ordinary word. Japanese dictionaries don't build continuous into it. They don't build philosophy into it. You could use it about a one-time fix. You could use it about a large change. It works the same way the English word improvement works. So the first thing that happened in transit is that a common word got promoted. It arrived in English wearing ropes. Toyota didn't invent the word. What Toyota built was a system around it. Here's what Kaizen names inside the Toyota production system. It begins with a standard, a documented way the work is currently done. The standard isn't there to control the worker. It's there so a problem has something to be a problem against. Because without a standard, you cannot tell whether a change helped. So the worker works from the standard. If the worker finds a problem, the worker improves the work. The improvement becomes the new standard. Then it runs again. That's it. That's Kaizen. Every person, every day, improving their own work from a standard. Now, watch the part that doesn't travel. The person who finds the problem is the person with authority to change the work. At Toyota, a suggestion is often not a suggestion. Much of the time, by the moment the idea is written up, the change has already been made. The proposal and the implementation are the same act. There's no committee, there's no line, and then there's the cord. You've heard about the cord, Andon, from the word for a paper lantern. Most of what you've heard about it is slightly wrong, and the wrong part is the part that matters. Pulling the cord doesn't slam the line to a halt. It lights a signal and it starts a clock. The team leader comes running in seconds because Toyota staffs the floor with team leaders whose job is to come running. And if the problem is solved inside the cycle, the line never stops. If it is not, the line stops. So the cord is not a kill switch. It's a request for help that's guaranteed to be answered. The guarantee is the product. Everything else is rope. Now, the part almost nobody exports. For Kaizen to work, a person has to be able to improve their work without improving themselves out of a job. So think about what's being asked. You are asking someone to look hard at their own task and find the waste in it, the wasted motion, the wasted seconds, which is to say the reason fewer people might be needed to do what they do. Nobody does that in a company that lays people off for efficiency. If improvement means somebody goes home, the floor will protect itself by saying that, and it will be right to. Toyota's answer is a long-standing principle that people freed up by improvement are not laid off. They're moved, they're retrained, they're put on improvement work. The principle didn't come from a poster, it came from a bad year. In 1950, Toyota was close to collapse. Post-war deflation had gutted its cash, and the banks would land only on the condition of a restructuring, and the restructuring meant job cuts, which the company had promised not to make. So the union struck, and the dispute ran about 2 months. By Toyota's own account of its history, plants were closed, more than 2,000 employees left, and the workforce fell to around 6,000. And on the 5th of June that year, Kiichiro Toyota resigned as president, the founder's son, the man who had turned a loom company into a car company. He took responsibility for the layoffs he had promised he would never make, and he died less than 2 years later. So I want to be careful here because it's easy to make that into a legend, and Toyota's a company, not a monastery, but the outcome is a matter of record. Out of that year, Toyota arrived at an understanding with its workers. An understanding is the floor everything else stands on. Kaizen is not a mindset. Kaizen is a bargain. Improvement flows up because security flows down. Take away the security and the improvement stops. It's not a cultural difference. That's math. So how did the word get to your hallway? The route is short and it's documented. Through the 70s and early 80s, Western manufacturers noticed that Japanese cars kept not breaking, and they wanted to know why. A market appeared for the answer. In 1985, a Japanese management consultant named Masaaki Imai founded the Kaizen Institute. The following year, he published a book called Kaizen, The Key to Japan's Competitive Success. That book put the word into the English-speaking business world. Imai spent the rest of his life carrying it further. He died in 2023 at 92. In early 1987, Imai ran a seminar near Hartford, Connecticut. For the hands-on part of the week, he brought in a Japanese consulting firm called Shingi Jutsu, founded by men who had spent years working under Taiichi Ono at Toyota. American executives in that room hired them. Donna Hare became their first American client. The format Shingi Jutsu taught was a week, 5 days and 1 night. It was an intensive, scheduled, facilitated workshop. In 1988, an MIT researcher named John Kraftsik published a paper that gave the whole thing its English name. 2 years later, a book out of the same name, MIT program, carried that word around the world. And here is a detail I didn't expect to find. Kaizen is a registered trademark in the United States, held by the Kaizen Institute for Education and Training Services. The registration record notes in plain language that the mark is a transliteration of a Japanese word meaning improvement. An ordinary word for improvement registered as a service mark in the country that imported it. Imai was a serious guy, and the consultants who followed were not all cynics. I point out the trademark because it shows the shape of the crossing. What arrived was a product, and products need a name, a format, a duration, and of course, a price. Here's what that did to the meaning. Inside Toyota, Kaizen is a daily practice with authority attached to the floor. There's no real equivalent in Toyota's own tradition of the 3 to 5 day Kaizen event. The event is a Western invention. There are books on how to plan one. That's not a small edit. That's the structure inverted. Daily became quarterly. Everyone became a selected cross-cultural team. Authority became facilitation. The standard became a slide. And improvement, which at Toyota is about developing people and removing waste with lower costs arriving as a result, became cost reduction, with people arriving as a result. Art Smalley, an American who worked inside a Toyota plant in Japan, says it pretty clearly. He said, when cost-cutting becomes the driver, workers correctly read Kaizen as a threat to their jobs and participation collapses. Correctly. That is the word to think about. On this channel, I call this failure mode costume. Costumes when one culture runs everything and pieces of another culture are borrowed and worn on the surface. It looks cross-built. It's not. The borrowed pieces are decoration on a structure that was never changed. I usually describe costume inside relationships. A couple where one person culture sets the calendar, the language, the money, the holidays, and the other person's culture supplies the food and the art on the wall. An organization could do the exact same thing. It just does it with more paperwork. The office kept its command structure, its budget cycle, its approval chains, its performance reviews, its layoffs, and on top of that unchanged structure, it hung a Japanese word. Nothing the operating system moved. The costume is the word. Now, if I stopped here, I would be telling you a comfortable story about West ruining Eastern wisdom, but I don't believe that story. So let me break it. In 1984, General Motors and Toyota opened a joint plant in Fremont, California. They called it NUMI, NUMMI. GM had closed that plant 2 years earlier. By most accounts, it was the worst plant in the company. On a normal day, about 1 in 5 workers didn't show up. Sabotage was real. Workers put bottles inside door panels so the finished cars would rattle. And when the plant reopened under the Toyota system, the union insisted on rehiring the same people, the same exact workers, the same union leadership. The official who fought for that said afterward that he believed it was the system that had been bad, not the people. And Toyota surprisingly agreed. GM did not want to. Within months, the cars coming off that line were among the best built in America. Same workers, same town, but different system. So this is not culture as destiny. It's not that Americans can't do this and Japanese can. The people didn't change. The authority changed. And then GM tried to spread it, which brings us back to the cords. The rope went into other plants, but the response did not. Workers who pulled it were yelled at. And in a few plants, the cords came down. That's costume with a receipt. There's an account from a professor who has studied this for decades of a GM manager ordered by a senior executive to go to NUMMI with cameras and photograph every square inch so his own plant could be made to look exactly like it. The manager knew right away it was hopeless. You can't photograph how a supervisor answers a call for help. You can't photograph whether people trust each other. And a GM plant manager who tried to run the Toyota system at another California factory said the thing I keep returning to. When you walk into NUMMI, you can see plenty that is different. What you can't see is the system holding it up. At that factory, the workers resisted. And here's what I want you to notice. They had a reason. Under the new system, that plant stood to need about a quarter fewer workers. Nobody had offered them the other half of the bargain. So they read the tool as a threat because it was one. The plant closed in 1992. NUMMI itself closed in 2010, and 4,500 people lost their jobs. But one more thing, because the directions have to run both ways. Kaizen is itself borrowed. The small step improvement method Toyota built on came in part from American wartime training program called Training Within Industry, carried into Japan by the occupation and taken up by Toyota in 1951. One of its modules taught supervisors to break down and improve their own work. Toyota's suggestion system was borrowed too. Executives went to Ford, saw a suggestion program, and brought the idea home that same year. So the thing the West believes it imported from Japan is partly something Japan built out of something the West handed it, built better and handed back. Nobody owns improvements. So that's not the point of this episode, and Toyota is not a shrine. In 2009 and 2010, the company went through a global recall crisis, and its own chief executive told the United States Congress that they had chased growth faster than they could develop their people. Toyota also watched costume happen in its own system. In 2001, as it's globalized, the company wrote its philosophy down in an internal document and insisted on 2 pillars, not one: continuous improvement and respect for the people. 2 wheels, 1 cart. They wrote that down because the world had started taking the tools and leaving the people. So what would it take to actually cross-build this instead of wearing it? Well, I'm not going to give you a checklist because the checklist is how the word got into trouble in the first place. But I will give you what the framework asks. Cross-building requires understanding your own culture as a culture and not a neutral reality, which means that one's Kaizen has to look hard at what it already is, a place where information travels up and authority travels down, where changing a process requires permission, where efficiency has historically meant fewer people. Not a neutral starting point. That's a system with its own logic, and its logic is not compatible with the thing on the poster. Cross-building requires an honest accounting of the power imbalance. In a workplace, the imbalance isn't subtle. One side can end the other side's income. Cross-building requires that the side with more power move further, not out of guilt, but because they have more room to move. A worker can't create their own job security. Only the company could do that. And cross-building requires that what emerges is new, which means whatever you build will not look like Toyota. It shouldn't. Toyota is the answer to Toyota's questions. It worked out over decades in one industry, out of one crisis in one country. You're not going to photograph your way into it. What you can take is the shape of the bargain. If you want people to find the problems inside their own work, then finding a problem has to be safe. Answering a call for help has to be someone's actual job. And improving the work has to be something the person doing the work is allowed to do without asking. If you can't offer that, that's a real constraint, and I understand it, but then don't put the word on the wall. Now, listen, I run a company. I understand how this happens. You read something true, and the true thing is expensive, and the word is free. So you take the word. Kaizen means improvement. That's all it ever meant. The rest was never in the word. It was in what a person on the floor was allowed to do at 11 in the morning when they saw something go wrong. They could reach out and someone would come. Everything else is rope. My name is John, and this is Crossbuilt.